Hello, runners. Hello, everybody. Good to see you. Good to connect with all of you. I'm super excited to kickstart our season with our first episode of podcast with runners, uh, ex-runners from our group, as well as some stalwarts, some special guests from the world of running. This is what we do. I know that in this season we have 250 plus brand new runners joining us. So let me give you a little bit of context about this before we get started with our first episode of podcast for this season. So every season I host as I said, few luminaries, few ex-runners for a 1 hour chat, and I call that podcast with runners. The idea being learning happens from all directions. If I'm the only one who is sort of giving you all the necessary information about running, at some point that learning sort of tapers off. We believe that learning will be more effective if it also happens from peer to peer and from other directions. It is with that logic we started this series. Now it is 5 seasons into this. Every season we produce about 6 to 8 such podcasts. And if history is of any indication, these are all well sought out, and people love to hear, especially during those runs. They put it on and they listen to it, get to know how other people approach the art and science of running, and just generally understand how the world of running works. So it is within that context. Let me tell you, I'm extremely, extremely excited and humbled to have our first guest for this season. Welcome, Brent, to our podcast. Brent Ayer is a luminary across multiple spectrums of running. I mean, I cannot begin to explain and begin to explore who Brent is all about, but suffice it to say, he himself is a consummate runner, a coach for many, many decades. He was an ex-RRCA president. He was my instructor, coaching instructor. He runs coaching sessions for RRCA. So when I did my level 1 and level 2 training, he was my instructor. And he was our instructor for many, many coaches in the US and beyond. So as you can imagine, guys, this is going to be a very special podcast with Brent, because we're going to open various facets of his life connection with running in different ways. So let me get started. I can't wait to get started. In fact, Brent, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you, Bala. I appreciate it, and congratulate you on your work and spreading the message far and wide.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you. So as I said, Brent, since there are so many things to unpeel, I thought that let's put a little bit of a structure in this conversation, so that I would love to, go a little bit deep into various facets of your life, so to speak. So I thought, why don't we split our next 1 hour discussion into 3 or 4 sections? Section 1, let's just talk about who you are as a person. What's your life experiences, a few things about you, so that we understand you as a human being more than a runner. What has Brent done in life other than running? I would love to understand that. Let's talk about that for a few minutes. And then I want to switch gears and want to talk about what is Brent, who is Brent as a runner? How did he get into this sport? What have you done as a runner? We will talk about that a little bit. Hopefully we learn from your illustrious career as a runner. Then I want to move again, and I want to touch on Brent as a coach. How did you get into this, into that portion of running? Your experiences and few learnings that we can get, especially me as a coach, I would love to learn from you, as given you are my instructor. And then finally, let's do Brent as an RRCA executive, doing multiple things for RRCA. I think you can imagine there's a lot of things we can talk about. So let's start with the first one, Brent. Why don't you share a little bit about your life journey, where you started and how things, what did you do in life?
Oh gosh, I was born in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, raised in Illinois and Idaho, and then when I was 18 years old, made my way to Maryland. So I graduated from high school at a place called Plainfield High School in Illinois. It's about 30 miles south and west of Chicago. Um, my dad was a chemical engineer at a time when chemical in the 50s and 60s and 70s, at a time when chemical engineers were in high demand. Mm-hmm. Explains a lot of the moving around that I did. But we found ourselves in Maryland. When I finished high school, I ran all 4 years at Plainfield High School. I then ran 2 years at Frederick Community College, mm-hmm. Frederick, Maryland. I then received a partial scholarship to go back to Illinois, where I graduated from Lewis University in 1977 with a degree in public administration. I then returned to Maryland to my folks' house, and I got a job immediately in, oh gosh, retail management training, which was gruesome. It was probably 60 hours a week standing on linoleum over concrete, and it was brutal on my running efforts. So for those of you that have jobs like that, I sympathize with you. It was probably about a year of my life where if I didn't get up at 5:30 in the morning and run beforehand, it just was not going to happen. So those of you that have real jobs in the real world, I sympathize with the attempts to work running into them. It's not very easy for a whole lot of people. Then amazingly enough, I just got incredibly fortunate. I had never been involved in politics in my life. I probably couldn't have told you which party I was registered to vote with. And suddenly I got a call from the local congressman's office asking me to come in for a job interview. Wow. It was years before I could figure out what was going on.
And how old were you at that time, Brent? Like what age group were
you? 1 year out of college. I was
okay. Well, early on in your career. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and it was, as near as I could tell at the time, the congresswoman's wife came into the store to watch me work, and then called the congressman's chief of staff and told him to give me an interview. And I passed the screen. I have no idea how, because I didn't know anything about politics. I didn't know anything about the congressman in question. And it was years before I could figure out, but congressman's wife chaired the local commission on physical fitness. And it turned out that my junior college track coach and a guy in my dad's carpool were also on the fitness commission. And she was saying, I need somebody young with a fair amount of time on their hands, whatever. And she immediately got 2 endorsements of me from these 2 people that sat on the fitness commission. So I go in to interview with the congressman, and I knew he was something of a runner, but he had actually, I'm trying to remember, he had run Boston the year before.
Wow.
In his late 40s in something like 304, 305.
Congressman at 304. I will vote for
him. Yeah. And so the job interview took place, and honest to goodness, it consisted of nothing but running questions.
Wow. And were you sort of invited because of your running prowess? Is that the reason he connected with you?
I have no idea.
Wow. Okay.
So I got to the end of the conversation, and I said, Congressman, what about the job? And he goes, oh, heck, you got the job. And I go, no, what is it? What do you want? And I was essentially, I think the reason there weren't a lot of in-depth questions about politics is I essentially drove him places. So I picked him up at his house in Frederick, Maryland, and then drove him to Washington, D.C. And because I knew absolutely nothing about the political world, I just pestered him with questions all the way down the road. Finally, he turns to me, he goes, Brent, you see this stack of newspapers? I have to get through this before I get to Washington, D.C. If I get through these and I have additional time, then it can be question time. But for now, you got to be quiet. The cool thing about the job, in all honesty, was I was the only member of the staff that saw both parts of it.
I see.
So I drove him out into the district. I watched him speak. I watched him meet with people. And then I drove him into DC and I got to witness what went on in the office and what went on the House floor and what went on in the committees. And so while it was certainly the most junior position on the staff, it was also probably the most comprehensive in terms of learning how the office functioned and what people did and what the interactions were. At the time, the average congressional district had about 600,000 people. So, and ours was by Eastern standards spread across a fairly large geographic area. It was essentially all of central and western Maryland. So there were 3-hour drives out into Garrett County. And
I see.
Unfortunately, and here, there's no way you could have known this, Bala, but the congressman actually passed away while on a long run with me.
Oh, wow.
He was 49 years old and he had an aortic aneurysm.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The kind of thing that if it's caught early these days, they just put a stent in there. But back then, it really was not largely detectable and it was believed to be pretty much genetic.
Yeah, my friend had a similar situation, right? And were you running along with him at that time? When,
Yeah, and we were in the middle of nowhere. We were on the C&O Canal Park. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, the C&O Canal was actually envisioned by George Washington. It was probably finished in the early 1820s, 1830s, but it runs 180 miles alongside the Potomac River. Some of it is pretty remote, and we were on a section that was extremely remote.
wow.
And it probably took. I was able to run down through the canal to an adjoining road and flag down a motorist, but it probably took 45 minutes for an hour for the ambulance to get there. And so I basically attempted to perform CPR for an hour by myself,
Wow.
unsuccessfully.
Wow.
So that was a. Then, ironically enough, the woman who had been responsible for my hiring, his spouse ran for office and won. And I continued on as her driver for about 3 years. It's kind of funny. She promoted me out of the driver's seat to be Washington office manager and special projects director. And on my last day as her driver, I got 2 tickets. I got 2 tickets for speeding on the last day. And she told the officer when I got the second ticket, she turned to him and said, "Thank God I'm promoting him out of here before he kills me." So um, it was, and essentially I just worked my way up the chairs until I became a chief of staff for her. And then when she left Congress, I ran the Washington office for a congressman from Pittsburgh and then a congressman from Tennessee. And eventually I spent 30 years there. Somehow in the course of that time, and you talk about fortune. I actually met my wife on Capitol Hill.
Wonderful.
And at one stage of the game, I was chief of staff for Congresswoman Byron, and she was working next door for a congressman from Massachusetts. And I upset somebody on the staff who went crying in to see my wife and for some commiseration. And my wife responded by saying, "I know he's an asshole. You don't have to come in here and tell me." so,
Well,
so it was pretty entertaining time.
so did you retire from Congress duties after what, 30, 35 years? Is that how it was?
Yeah, 30 years. Um, Interestingly enough, running even played into it then because I knew since I was 18 years old that I had wanted to be a college coach, but I had the kind of job that was so all consuming. It was a 60, 70 hour a week job that I knew that I was not going to be able to coach as long as I was in that position. So I used that time to get my theoretical education. So I took USA Track and Field Level 1. I took RRCA Level 1 at the convention. I took USATF level 2 endurance. I took U.S. track and cross country coaches, advanced certs in sprints and jumps, and U.S. ATF advanced certs and throws and RRCA level 2. So I basically spent about a decade using my vacation time to travel around and get these certifications in the hopes that someday I'd actually get to, be a hands-on coach.
Wow. And we should
Ironically
talk about
enough,
that. We should talk about that.
yeah,
I want to double click a little bit on that under your coach section discussion that I laid
right.
out. Wow.
So I then took a 3-year hiatus where I worked with a small investment bank, which is not as odd as it seems because the investment bank was run by the congresswoman's eldest son. uh, and I guess we can get into it more. But my local college, Hood College in Frederick, Maryland, decided to start. They went co-ed. They'd been a women's college for almost 100 years. And they went co-ed and they had 6 women's sports and no men's sports. So they were trying to get programs on the board quickly. And if they were inexpensive, that was even better. And that's when they decided to start a college cross country program. And I just leapt at it.
Got it.
I totally did not understand what they were expecting. I thought they were looking for somebody with technical expertise. What they really wanted was, as a failing women's college, they wanted somebody who could string 2 sentences together and snooker kids into paying $40,000 a year to go to this college.
Wow.
So, and I got the job.
Let's come back to that, Brent. Let's actually come back to that, how you started off as a coach, because that's a very interesting story out there. But as we leave this section 1, I just wanted to lay out a couple of points for my audience in terms of learning. There is some very interesting learnings out there. And I hope, Brent, you would agree with me. Now, first thing is for folks who are youngsters looking for career, think about how running actually helped Brent to land his first job. And I think even, I would say he connected with his boss through running. I think there is something special there. Is it fair to say, Brent?
It's a whole string of very fortunate luck, Bala.
Right.
I can't claim that I was responsible for any of it. It was just a whole string of very fortunate items.
Correct. But I've heard this, that running opens up discussions, like how golf opens up common communication points with, interviewers and executives. I also have seen runners connect with other runners at a level that's slightly more deeper than just, we go and play basketball together or something like that. Because I think there is
I agree with that. And back in the 70s, it was even more rare.
Right.
Because there were almost no women that were running. It wasn't a mass community movement. It was a tiny little knot of people.
Correct.
Boston Marathon back in those days was, oh gosh, 300, 400, 500 people. Look at the production that major urban marathons are these days. I mean, it's the growth in the running community is phenomenal, and I think it makes your point even more thoroughly because it's a broader sort of and physical movement today than it was back in the day when I got started.
100%. So that's what
I think it's fantastic.
Exactly. And that's what I wanted to say for those of you who are just getting into running, the 250 odd folks, and even others. Don't think of running as just running. There's a lot of other benefits to it. And yes, of course, there are so many benefits of running that we all will talk about in the next 16 weeks. But there is this professional networking element of running that I personally have enjoyed a lot. Like, for instance, like me connecting and having this 1.5 hours quality time with someone as special as Brent. I think of that as, running gave that opportunity to me. Okay. And there are many such examples. You can just talk to fellow runners. Good portion of their interviews have been about running, especially when they get to know that they've completed a Boston Marathon or any other marathon or any half marathon even. So that's one point I wanted to bring that out. The second point is a safety point that with the unfortunate, story that Brent talked about. And I've had this conversation before as well, especially when you're going on long runs, guys. And when you're going on long runs in these kind of wooded areas where maybe you're alone or just 1 or 2 folks, make use of the technology that is available. What I have I normally do, especially when I do alone long runs, I actually share my WhatsApp live location to my wife. I think that is something that is easy and it is safe, that tomorrow something happens. Forget about big incident like this heart issue. Let's say you trip and fall down and have a major sort of scratch and you're not able to sort of walk from that point. You still need a location to be told to someone to help you, right? And we have easy technology available right now, not like the
Yeah.
1970s and 80s. Make use of that, please. So I always do that, share my WhatsApp live location to my family when I do long distance runs, especially in the wooded areas or alone areas. That's one. The second thing I do is ICE, in case of emergency, is a universal construct of storing a contact number called ICE and store your emergency contact number there. So that tomorrow, when any other runner comes in, and in your phone, there is a setting where ICE can be accessed even when your screen is locked. Okay, I will send you some instructions if you need it. So that any third person comes in, the ICE number is seen outside so that people can call and reach your near and dear ones if someone wants to help you. ICE, in case of emergency number. I think these two things I would suggest everyone should do. Safety first, rest all will flow. Brent, do you have any other comments?
Yeah, as a coach of young girls, essentially high school age girls now, um, especially my distance runners. The sprinters are confined to the track and you can see what's going on, but endurance runners do what endurance runners do, which is go out and explore. And my recommendation to them has been to go out in groups of 3 and somebody have a phone with them.
Yes.
But it's improved so much. When Mr. Byron died in 1977, there was zero cell phone technology.
Of course.
If he ran into a similar problem today, he probably survives it.
Yes, absolutely. Very unfortunate, Brent. And I know it would have taken an extreme amount of leadership on your part to hold yourself together and try to run to the nearest point and try to see if you can get help and then give CPR for an hour. That just shows, great leaders are born in times of emergency. And I think you did your best. It's unfortunate, of course. Anyway, let us move on to the next bucket. So we'll change hats. Let's take out let's put on the runner hat, Brent. Don't talk about your coaching. Let's just talk about running, you as a runner. Talk to us, please, about how did you get into running and what was your sort of progression look like as a runner?
So Plainfield, Illinois in the 1970s was um, it at that in that period of time, there weren't really the kind of organized sports that you see today, the club soccer, the club lacrosse, the sorts of things that you see now. It was more sandlot baseball and pickup games. And so you didn't really have a way to measure yourself as an athlete against anybody except the people you live nearby. So I didn't know what kind of an athlete I was, but my high school was relatively small. There were about 100 male students. And I would say 60 of them, including me, showed up for the football team, American football. um, and I was 5'6", probably 130 pounds, and slow. And so they didn't know what to do with me, so they made a tight end out of me, which meant I was a lineman, essentially a blocker at 5'6", 130 pounds. A lot of time in practice on the ground. And I would guess that over the course of the season, I may have played 3 minutes.
Wow.
The handwriting was on the wall.
Right.
So then basketball starts, and the same 60 kids all run over to basketball. And they're only going to keep 12. I end up having the ignominious accomplishment of being the first guy to quit. So out of the 60 guys there, I could see the handwriting on the wall. I was going to be cut. So I quit and I go home. And my father says, "What are you going to do in the spring?" I said, "I'm going out for baseball."
let's check that box too.
Yeah. And he says, You don't see a pattern here, do you? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you're no good at classic eye-hand coordination American ball sports. And here's where I made my mistake. I had forgotten that my dad had run track for a couple of years at the University of Maine.
Oh, wow. Okay, it runs in the
Totally,
family.
totally forgotten that. Totally forgotten that. And he says, and I said, well, what should I do then if I'm no good at classic eye hand coordination American ball sports? My dad says, well, you should go out for track. And I blurted out, Dad, track is a sport for wusses. And he went to his go to defensive mechanism, which was sarcasm. And he says, no, no, track and field has something for everybody. Let's inventory your skill set. And he says, are you fast? No. Can you jump? No. Are you strong? Not particularly. Can you throw things far? No. And he finally looks at me and he smacks me on the shoulder and he says, son, you're a natural born distance runner. And I said, what does that mean? And my father says, you have no talent. You're just going to have to work your butt off.
Yeah.
So I show up for track and they run you through a series of drills that essentially prove what my father said.
So how old were you at that time, Brent?
I was a high school freshman.
Okay.
And they put me in a car, put me coach in the coach's station wagon. Coach drives 5 miles outside of town, throws us out in the middle of the road. All the experienced guys take off running. The one other freshman distance runner and I are standing in the middle of this 2-lane paved road 5 miles outside of Plainfield, Illinois, staring at each other. And Robbie turns to me and says, what are we going to do? And I said, I don't know, but we ought to at least start walking there because the sun's going to go down soon. And it was terrible the first 3 months. It was terrible. I was totally unfit. I got entered in my first indoor track meet, which was on a 150-meter yard, I guess back then, marked off thing in the basement of Downers Grove South High School. And I was entered in the 2 mile. So, take 3,200 yards divided by 150. That's a lot of circles. And I got lapped by the field.
Wow. But those days, Brent, you were running for sprint or you were actually doing?
I was running a 2-mile run in a basement of a high school in Illinois, my first track meet of my life. And I got lapped by the leader so many times I lost count. Finally looked over at my dad. I go, when am I done? Please deliver me from this. Then at the end of the season, after having worked so hard to gain that fitness, I guess how much I ran the next summer to get ready for cross country.
0.
And as you and all of your athletes know, it is much harder to get in shape than it is to stay in shape. And that was finally after enduring the second attempt to get in shape that the light kind of came on. It's like it's easier to keep some base level of fitness than it is to always start from scratch. So, but I improved steadily through high school, but some of that was just growth. I mean, I went in at 5'6", 130 pounds. I came out at 6'2", 149.
Got it.
My joke, I got my start in coaching by coaching youth track, which was basically 6 to 14-year-olds. And my joke about it was like shooting fish in a barrel because they were growing. Of course, they're going to improve. They're getting bigger. They're getting stronger. They're getting more coordinated. It wasn't like I was a masterful coach because they all improved. They improved because nature had them improve.
Nature took over. Yep. So in those days, Brent, in the first, let's say 6 months, 5 months of your running, like what was the maximum distance you would have run at a time? Kind of your equivalent of long runs.
Oh goodness. Back then in the 1960s, especially in track and field, there was a lot of what I used to refer to as interval-based flogging. Repeat 400s, repeat 800s, and always in even numbers, which used to mystify me. 10 times 400, the right answer. Why isn't it 9? Why isn't it 11? Why isn't it 350? Why isn't it 400? Why is it always one lap of the track in an even, nice round number? So there really was, I don't want to say there wasn't a lot of thought given it, but there was a lot of copying. And one of the other benefits you currently have, in fact, it's gone so far that it's almost as much a not a benefit as it is a benefit. You have access to just a gazillion sources of information on training.
Yep.
Back in my age, I had almost none.
Yeah.
Almost none. There were little booklets that were put out by Runner's World on topics that you could buy for like $1. That was it. I mean, there was no literature. There was obviously no blogs, no podcasts, no publications other than Runner's World at the time. Information was sparse. You got it by talking to other coaches. You got it by talking to other athletes. And the other challenge I had is that I had 4 coaches in 4 years. They were almost always sprint-based people.
Got it.
My final coach, and I think this is what made me want to be a coach. My final coach in high school had run the 400-meter hurdles for the University of Iowa. He was a very competent, high-level Division I hurdler. But when he got to Plainfield High School, where he was an English teacher, he's 24, 25 years old, and he finally turned to me and he goes, you know more about this than I do, even though you're 17 years old. Why don't you help me write the workouts?
Interesting.
I was blown away. But I'd spent 3 years basically talking to everybody who would talk to me, my competitors, their coaches, any place I could go to get a scrap of information. And I think that and the encouragement of my high school coach made me really interested in doing this. In fact, at our
Absolutely.
when he recognized me, he said, "Don't be fooled. You think you're staring at a 17-year-old. There's a 35-year-old man trapped inside that body." So he was very encouraging of me.
And then when you look at your sort of look back and look at your running career, what are some of the milestones? Like what all things you participated and how did that progress?
Oh, I think I got once again I got very lucky when my folks moved to Maryland. I was trying to figure out. Well, first of all, true confessions. I had been a very mediocre high school student in academics. If I was interested in it, I got an A. If I wasn't, I figured out how to get a C. And there were twice as many things I was not interested in as there were that I was interested in. I was basically interested in writing and history. And if it wasn't those things, I just didn't care. And I figured out how to get a gentleman's C. So my grades and my motivation towards academics were poor. And I was looking at colleges, which mercifully for me back then, it's not as competitive as it is now. Those of you who are parents of high school age children know how competitive it is in academically in the college setting today. That was not the case 40 years ago. Trust me. I got into every place I applied to. But I then went down to the track to do a summer workout at Frederick Community College, and I ran into 2 guys who were my age, and they said, we're starting a program. You should come here. And I said, no, I'm pretty much set where I'm going. Then they pointed down the hill and they said, that is a 3-time U.S. Olympic coach, and he is going to be coaching us.
Wow.
And I remember, I don't know if I said it or not, but I remember thinking, oh, that's baloney. I don't just move to Frederick, Maryland and land on a 3-time U.S. Olympic coach. But it turned out I had. he was an interesting guy. He had coached the women's hurdles in the Olympics at that time. By the time he was done, it would be 3 times. At that time, it was actually once or twice. But he was a legitimate, internationally known coach. But again, I landed on a hurdles coach. But he knew people and he was connected, and he taught me an awful lot about the broader track and field community. And because, so Bala, earlier you'd asked how many miles I did. In the early on stages, I didn't do many, but by the early 70s, the long slow distance, uh, for lack of a better term, craze was seizing the running community.
I see.
I got up in my base phase my senior year. I got up to 90 miles a week
90 miles a week. Wow. Okay.
as a high school senior. Now, when the season started, what tended to happen is I would build long, slow distance in the off season. And then when the season started, we immediately went to more speed and more intensity. So the mileage fell and the intensity went up,
Got it.
which is interesting because I still tend to, we're doing that on a kinder, gentler level right now with my high school kids.
Got it.
But their mileage, the experienced ones at the high end is probably going to hit more like 35 to 45. I want, and we can get into this later when we talk about coaching philosophy, but you know this from your level one and level two. 90-minute long run is sort of where the biggest bang for your buck in terms of recruiting convertible fibers, building mitochondria at the cellular level.
Yep.
But you can't take a kid who's running 20 miles a week and send him out on a 90-minute long run without expecting some problems to occur.
Correct.
So the goal is to have them inch up towards that. So maybe the long run for an experienced high school female junior might be an hour, and an hour on 35 to 40 miles a week.
Got it. Got it.
So I'm not getting the ideal, but my goal is I want them to be running the rest of their lives.
Yes.
I edge them upwards towards the goal. Even if they don't run in college, I hope they'll continue to run recreationally. And then when I hope they're out, I hope they find somebody like you who can, I want to teach them enough so that there's some structure and they understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Right.
And then hopefully they'll seek out other, people with experience that can help shape their going forward.
Totally.
But I was very fortunate. I then received a partial scholarship to run for Lewis University in the Chicago suburbs. I had a really positive experience there. But you asked about my most memorable. Oh gosh, I ran Boston in 1980, and I was 278th.
What was your timing, Brett?
236.
230 audience. Let's pause for a second. This is a different.
Yeah, well,
different.
I got to tell you,
of runners.
I got to tell you, Bala, I kind of botched that up too. I was probably on sub 232 pace, and I had. If you've ever seen Northern Illinois, it's flat as a pancake. So as a consequence, when I moved to Maryland, I got dusted every time I hit a hill, and I spent a crud ton of time working the uphills without realizing that it's just as important to work the downs. So what I typically would do is I would drive up the hill and then jog down. Well, when you get to the top of Heartbreak Hill, you then face a long, gradual downhill into Boston. And I'd been clicking them off at about 547 a mile.
Wow.
And I got the top of Heartbreak Hill and I felt at 21 miles, I felt great. I was like, okay, I am just going to blister this last 5 miles. I am going to. And so I go, okay, bear down. Look down at my watch, 6:07. I go, come on, concentrate, go. I look down again, 6:30. It was funny because I went dead before I felt it. Well, somewhere around mile 23, I felt it, and it was my quads just abandoning the fight. And the problem, Bala, is that I hadn't practiced running hard downhill.
Yeah.
Now, as you know, that's a double-edged sword in that if you're running courses that have long downhill segments, you need it, but it's very easy to get injured practicing running downhill hard.
Absolutely.
So it's like everything else in running, it needs to be done in increments and then stretched out.
Incredible. So this botched 236 effort, botched within quotes. Is that a PR or you've had what's your PR for a full marathon PR, Brent, and where did it happen?
Oh, that was it.
That's your PR. 236 is your PR. Yeah. That's not something to.
I had a 6:19:50.
6:19. That's your average pace for that race.
No, no. I ran 6 hours and 19 minutes for a 50-mile race.
Oh, 6:9:50. Sorry. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So you did a 50-mile race. And when you look back at your career before we get to your coaching section, how many full marathons you might have done in life? I don't know whether you even kept a count, but you know.
I never counted them. I'd say between marathons and ultras, probably somewhere less than 30, but more than 20.
Got it. 20, 30. And Boston, obviously, I'm assuming you've done some of the marquee majors as well. New York, Chicago.
No, what I did, Bala, is I would, especially once I graduated from college, I would I would run my training cycles in 2 6-month cycles, basically 24 weeks of training, followed by 2 weeks of active rest, followed by 24 weeks of training. And my goal each time was to PR in the marathon at the end of the training cycle. So my times went from, in high school, I ran 3:14. My first time in junior college, I ran 2:59. Then the next time I ran 2:50. I got down to 2:44 my senior year in college at the Drake Relays Marathon. Trying to think, the progression then went 2:42, 2:37, 2:36.
Such so is rarefied space for us.
Well, you can see that the range of improvement's narrowing near the end. In my heart of hearts, I think I had a sub 2:30 in me. But what happened was when I was the congressman's driver, I was given unlimited time to train because I had little to do in Washington, D.C., right? My job was at night or in morning, picking him up, putting him around. But when I was promoted out of the car and given a desk job, I was expected to be at my desk for 50 to 60 hours a week. And my mileage went from, I would say, an average of about, I was bouncing around between 60 and 80 miles a week in my middle 20s. It got halved.
Got it.
When I was promoted, it was cut in half. I suddenly went to 40 miles a week.
Awesome. So last question, quick one, before we go to the next section. As I said, we have so many other wonderful sections to talk about with you. Like ultra distances, what's the max you've done in ultra?
Oh, 50.
50 miles is typical.
I had a real problem, Bala. And it didn't matter what the distance was. When I came under stress, even if I was sprinting 400 meters or racing the 800 meters, and it certainly held true in marathons and ultras, but when I came under duress, I tended to get nauseated. Mm. And when I got nauseated, especially in the longer runs, I had a real problem between 38 and 42 miles. And I'm sure it was an energy-based problem. I would get nauseated and then I couldn't keep down anything except very diluted Gatorade.
I see.
I couldn't keep down food. I couldn't. And it was interesting because I sat next to Dean Karnazes at an RRCA luncheon one year at the convention. And I was explaining this to him. And he goes like this. And I go, what does that mean? He says, when you can't keep nutrition down, you're just circling the drain, waiting to go down.
Correct. Very good point.
He was so right. And I think training wise, the mistake I made is I should have pushed myself in training till I reached that point and then experimented with various kinds of nutrition to see what I could tolerate. If you want to see a book that discusses this really thoroughly, Relentless Forward Progress by Byron Powell is really, and probably half of the book, it's about ultra training. What's interesting to me, he has 3 different sample training programs in that book that don't largely, they do largely resemble a lot of the marathon training programs that are out there, with 1 or 2 major differences. Back-to-back long runs on Saturday and Sunday are one of them. But the other thing I found helpful about the book is over half of it is dedicated to race day logistics and support.
Got it.
How to take care of yourself during rough patches of the ultra, how to realize what resources the race director is going to provide and is not going to provide, and most importantly, how you your support crew can take care of any of your demands over the course of that extremely long undertaking. So it's
cool. Awesome, Brent.
I wish it had been around when I was trying them.
So, Brent, I took some notes before we go to the next section, which is the coach, Brent as a coach section. I thought I'll summarize few interesting points that, as you mentioned, and I want to highlight to my audience. First one is the impact a coach can have on a runner's sort of journey. So if you think about Brent's story, coach early days of his running career, I think he was having a star coach putting him through some of the things that he never thought he would do, and the rest is history, as they say. So why I'm saying that is, we have a team of 16 coaches, and one of the things that we train our coaches is to not just teach them how to run, but actually make them do things that they never knew they could do. That's what we are training as a coach. So, which we'll talk about it in the next section. But I thought that this is something that's very pervasive in Brent's life as well. The second thing he talked about was miles matter. You cannot do long distance runs without miles. And you remember, he said about, is that 90 miles in his off season? That's what he was doing in his peak running time. 90 miles in his off season. That means he was putting on a lot of miles and getting his cardiovascular strength up. And that definitely helped in hitting all those sub-3 full marathons. The third thing I sort of took notes is this. Brent is got an amazing collection of reading material. And Brent, you had shared it with me. I hope you'd be okay if I share that with my fellow runners here.
Yep, absolutely.
He has a beautiful collection of, go-to books on running and things related to running. His mention about Relentless Forward Progress by Byron Prowess, or is it Powers?
Yep.
Yep. I think I'm just calling that out. It's a good book. You should definitely download an Audible. And when you're running, these are times when you have those me time, and a good use of those me time when you're doing those long runs is listening to these interesting books and podcasts and stuff. So I'm going to share Brent's glossary of books that he has collected over his lifetime. And trust me, it's a treasure trove of information. And thanks, Brent, for putting that together for us. So that's what it is. I've taken these 3 points. Nutrition and active rest, he talked about a little bit. Guys, nutrition is everything. You remember that downward spiral you was telling? That is what bonking is all about in full marathon. You will.
Amen.
You're not a Superman. There is something we'll discuss. Your glycogen levels can only take you up to maybe 2 hours, 15 minutes. After that, there is no energy source, really. So you are bonking. So unless you plan for your nutrition and your long runs, you can be however strong you are, it doesn't mean anything. If a car you cannot have a BMW, Mercedes, latest powerful cars, but there is no fuel. The car won't run. That's really what he's trying to talk about. So nutrition is a very important pillar. Nutrition during, before, and after runs, all 3 are important as you build. And we will discuss a lot more. And you heard it directly from Brent as well. Congrats,
Steve
Brent.
Magnus. If you want some interesting podcasts on coaching, Steve Magnus, who used to coach for Nike and is now the University of Houston's head endurance coach, made the observation that 90% of recovery is sleep and nutrition.
There you go. Steve Magnus, is that a podcast, Brent?
He's got several things that are out. One is called The Science of Running, and the other is called On Coaching. And his last name is spelled Magness.
Got it. Steve Magnus podcast, Science of Running, and what are the other one you said?
On Coaching.
On Coaching. Okay, we will figure this out. As I said, guys, this gift is going to keep coming right through the podcast because Brent is an encyclopedia of running knowledge. Okay, Brent, let's move to, I want to keep this within an hour. I know you have a limited time as well. So I want to get the max out of you from this time that you're allocated. So let's spend 5 to 7 minutes on the third section, which is Brent as a coach. So I really have only 2 questions. How did you get into coaching? And what is your coaching philosophy and what have you done with coaching thus far in your life?
Well, I knew my eventual goal was to be a coach at the college level, but I knew that since I had no coaching experience, the likelihood that I was going to get hired at a college was remote. I did have, as I discussed previously, I did have this sort of broad theoretical understanding, and I competed for 38 years. So oh, well, we'll talk about coaching yourself some other time, but um, that's a hard thing to do because you can't be objective about yourself.
Yeah.
Um, but that's what I did. So I had probably 1,000 races under my belt, 110,000 miles worth of training over 38 years. That's not as impressive as it sounds. I did the math one time, and it actually comes out to 6 or 7 miles a day. So
over a
and
period of 30 years. Keep that in mind.
yeah, well, and some of it, quite honestly, was lower than that because of all the 90 to 100-mile weeks I had in college.
Yeah.
So I was at my little, I left Capitol Hill and had a 3-year hiatus with an small investment bank. And I did have a little bit of time then, and I wandered out to see the local youth track and field club. And I, um, so I'm watching these kids run, and I go up and talk to the head coach, who, by the way, was a sprinter in the 1964 Olympics and had actually was the protege of my junior college 3-time U.S. Olympic track coach. But she was about 10 years older than I was, so we'd never really met before. Her name was Debbie Thompson Brown, and just a phenomenal person. But she says to me in the course of our conversations, "Good, you can be the endurance coach." And I'm like, "Whoa, what do you mean? I'm just here checking this out to see what's going on. And you're offering me the endurance coach position sight unseen? That's kind of, don't you think that's kind of risky?" Oh, gosh. So there were probably about 20 little endurance kids between the ages of 8 and 14. And so I go home and I'm thinking about this. And I said, well, I know you don't run them 100 miles a week. I know that. But I also suspected that they weren't littler versions of us.
Yep.
That somehow, and I knew how to structure adult training, but I did not know how to structure youth training. And at that stage of the game, I was any port in a storm. I'm just furiously searching the internet. It's about the year 2000, and I came across this book called Training Young Distance Runners by Russ Pate and Larry Green. And it was fantastic. It walked you through one step at a time, build strength, a lot of circuit training, a lot of injury prevention stuff, be cautious in your building of mileage, be progressive, understand that 2 14-year-olds can be two entirely different creatures. And the training age is as important as biological age. So I'll give you an example. One of the reasons I was astounded that she made me endurance coach was I had this remarkable 12-year-old national class female distance runner.
Wow. Okay.
And by her 8th grade year, she ran a 5:04 mile.
5:04. My goodness. Okay.
Yeah, phenomenal. But that was an adventure in and of itself. She, the very first race I go to, she's running the mile, and she crosses through 200 meters in 29 seconds.
229 seconds. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Oh, Lord.
58-second 400 times 4. And she's got this other little girl just pasted to her.
Yeah.
And then she, as nature causes you to do, because she went out like a scalded rabbit, she starts slowing down, but talent always wins out,
yeah.
right? She's just a superior genetic creature in terms of distance running. What she is in terms of other things, who knows? But so she wins, and I come up to her afterwards, and I said, "Chelsea, what was that first 200 meters all about?" She goes, well, I didn't know how fast the other little girl was. I said, well, let me give you a clue. You're out in 29, which is a 58, which is a 352 mile if you hold that the whole way. And the current woman's world record is 417 and it's not held by a 12-year-old.
Oh my goodness.
and
That's
and she does
incredible.
this.
Okay.
She does what every 12-year-old on the planet would do when you address them like that. She does a hair flip and then turns around and walks away. So across the track comes Debbie Thompson Brown, the head coach, former Olympian, and she's making a beeline. I think she's making a beeline towards me. And I'm like, uh-oh, I offended the prize bull and I'm going to get the horns, right? And no, she doesn't. And this is what made me love Debbie Thompson Brown. She instead intercepts the young lady and she says, I don't know what exchange you two had, but I saw your reaction to it, and that was rude and inappropriate. And you go back there and you complete the exchange in a civil manner with your coach. And that's when I just fell in love with Debbie. It's like, you know, I saw Debbie. Um, One of the fastest sprinters on the team was making fun of one of the slowest ones. She said, if you do that again, I'll remove you from this program. And he did it again, and she removed him. She didn't care if you were the most talented athlete or not. You treated everybody with respect, and she was just building a culture. She was definitely old school, but um, she was a fantastic human being. God rest her soul. And I coached for her for, oh gosh, 12 or 13 years. In fact, it overlapped with my college coaching career. So near the end, when I finally left the Frederick Striders, the youth club, I would be coaching in the fall with cross country. I'd be coaching indoor track. I'd be coaching outdoor track, and all summer long with the Striders. So I was essentially in season for multiple years, every day of the year. And it just finally got to be too much. And I stopped coaching at the youth level, but I spent 13 years at the college level.
Wow. And as a coach, what are like two or three things that you want all your runner? Every coach has a philosophy, right? So from your standpoint, what are some of the things that you want the runners to live by?
You ironically enough, at the close of the last section, you hit my coaching philosophy on the head.
Okay.
At the end of the day, when you come out of the process, I want you to have accomplished something that you did not think was possible.
Wonderful. Absolutely. That's
Absolutely the core. The second part I would tell you is that um, you coach the individual, not the program.
Mm.
That every individual will have different requirements. And no matter which program you choose, not everybody's going to fit in this neatly into the same bucket. I've had circumstances where I had two seemingly identical in terms of training age, biological age. Um, in this case, they happened to be two 18-year-old males at the college that ran the same. They were both like 16 high, 17 low, 17, 18-year-olds. One of them had been a wrestler in high school, and he was tough and durable. He could easily run 70 miles a week. The other guy broke down if I took him over 50. Why is that? God just made us all differently.
Correct. Coach the individual
and
than the program. I think that's a very nice thought. What would you consider as, I know you have a lot of sort of highs and achievements as a coach, but what would you consider as your pinnacle achievement as a coach?
Oh gosh. I would probably, and she would be embarrassed to hear me say this, but I had a young lady and I was late to the program. So I showed up her junior year, and she was the last person not to make the state championship. She missed. She was the last person.
Okay, just missed that cut off.
That back. I take that back. She was the last person to make it, and she finished last at the state meet.
Oh, I see.
and she ran 12:20.
Which distance?
For 2
Distance?
miles,
2 miles. Okay.
3,200 meters,
Mhm.
full equivalent of 2 miles. And as a senior, she ran 11:02.
Wow.
She would have lapped herself. The next year, if she ran the time that she ran as a senior, she almost would have lapped the time that she ran as a junior. And she went from the place she wanted to go to college. The coach had sent her a note saying, well, her junior year, saying, well, you haven't quite hit the cutoff standard to be a walk-on. We're not going to give you a scholarship, but if you want to try to walk on, you got to run this time, and you're not fast enough yet. This year, she ran number one for that program, that college program.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
It's just, but that's as a coach, I don't. Basically, what happened is the girl's nickname was Cece. Cece had a twin brother who also ran, and she and her brother just ran over the summer constantly. And probably for her, I would say probably got up to 50, 60 miles a week at higher end aerobic stuff, which for, a 16, 17-year-old girl, that's a lot. And then when she arrived for cross country, she just caught fire. And it was a matter of her confidence just grew and grew. And you can't, it's hard to teach confidence as a coach.
Correct. Correct.
But it's infectious once they get it. You can write the most beautiful program in the world. If the athlete doesn't believe in it or themselves, not much is going to happen.
Yep.
Just the mental approach to running is so critical. And I give Cece a ton of credit for turning her attitude around and really beginning to believe in herself and executing properly.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And just an academic question, Brent, but 30, 35 years of coaching at different levels. How many sort of runners would have gone through you as a coach, approximately, just to get an idea?
Oh, gosh. I knew how many at the college because I used to have arguments based on my financial contribution in terms of recruiting. So I had 225 athletes that I coached at Hood College one time or another. I have no idea how many youth are.
Just a ballpark for us to get an idea.
Oh, I don't. I suppose more than 1,000 and less than 2,000.
That's the number of professional, almost
But
like.
keep in mind, I don't. My preferred, almost all of my coaching has been institutional based.
Correct.
Meaning, I coached for a youth track club. I coached for a college. I am coaching for a high school. So I don't have the breadth that you do.
But you are focused on high-end coaching, right?
Well, I'm focused on small group in-person coaching.
Correct. That's what I was saying.
So as a result of that, I have a limited audience that I can get to.
Correct. And high-end. I mean, you're talking about sub 8 minute, 7 minute, 6 minute mile kind of runners.
I've got some 8, 9, 10 minute ones.
Got it.
Especially beginners in cross country.
Got it.
So what you'll have typically for us in cross country is 15 to 20. There'll be one or two sharks. There'll be one or two kids that are just out there to meet people and have friends and be social. And then because they score 5 in cross country, I got to take my non-sharks and my non-social people and find 3 or 4 and turn 3 or 4 of them into competitive people if we're to be successful. But some of that's just luck of the draw.
Yep.
We finished, 5th in the state in cross country and 2nd in the state in outdoor track last year. But we graduated a lot of talent.
Amazing.
There are a lot more projects this year than there were last year.
Awesome. Are you open, Brent, for a sort of a one-on-one personal sort of high-end coaching over online, that kind of stuff, or you're more of a face-to-face person?
I do some of it, but it's not what I'm about.
Yeah, you're more face to face on the ground, kind of like a
Small
traditional
group,
coaching. No,
small
makes
group.
sense. Yeah, small
I
group.
the,
That makes
the
sense.
reason I like small groups as opposed to individuals is you put kids or young adults or anybody grouped together by current level of fitness and ability, and then they can work together.
Yeah,
And by working together, they learn more about themselves. They set up the pace. They hopefully set up the pacing properly. Um, and that's the kind of coaching I enjoy.
makes
I
sense.
somebody in our class, in a level one class I was teaching, and she had 700 individual clients by herself. And I was blown away. Like, how on God's green earth do you do that?
Yeah, it's a very different segment.
Here I am pulling my hair out because I got 35 young female distance runners. It's like every day's like, oh my gosh. And she's got 700 of them. I, you know,
I would love to connect with her and learn from her. What's her name? I mean, later on, maybe I can
oh
tell me
gosh.
later on. But
But
awesome. Yeah.
you talk about different training theories. So Bobby Gessler, who you probably know well,
Yes.
Dr. Bobby, he and I are teaching a class in Northern Virginia, and I'm explaining to the class. I said, you talk about training systems. Bob Schul won an Olympic gold at 5,000, the only one ever won by an American male at the Olympics. He basically did his go to workout was 80 to 100 trips up and down the football field, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Turn around 8 years later, and Frank Shorter wins an Olympic gold in the marathon doing 120 to 140 miles a week of long, slow stuff.
Yeah.
Who's in the back of the room? Up jumps a young man. He's probably 25 years old. And he goes, Bob Schul was my college coach. And I go, no stuff. And I said, and what do you have you do? And he goes, oh, back and forth, up and down the football field. And I said, how'd that work for you? And he said, oh, well, I was broken 3 out of my 4 years. Yeah. My response to him was, maybe Bob Schul is an Olympic champion because he could survive that kind of work, and mere mortals struggle. So that's the importance of your fitting the individual.
To the coaching program.
Yeah, meeting the
Training the
individual where they
individual.
are.
Yeah, training the individual as opposed to training the coaching program. I guess that's your sort of
Right.
point here. Last, very quick question in the coaching section, maybe just a 1 minute on this, Brent. You had sort of gave a laundry list of things you had done in terms of the certifications you've done. Just for our benefit, can you just tell what all those are? Or, RRCA,
Yeah.
USA, what is that?
Um, USA track and field, every nation in the Olympic program um, is required to set up governing bodies that cover the sports they intend to participate in the Olympics. Um, Turns out in this country, it's authorized by an act of Congress. And USA Track and Field is the current incarnation of all things running and track and field. It's the Olympic governing body of the sport in this country. Now, they were late in setting up their coaching certification program, but they modeled it a lot after USA Swimming. Now, over the last 30 years, it's diverged somewhat, but USA Track and Field has set up 3 levels. Level one is a 2-day program where they basically give you a quick overview of all 20 track and field disciplines. And what's interesting or fascinating to me, and I think it has accrued to the benefit of the RRCA, is if you want to take USA Track and Field Level 2 endurance, you still got to take 20 minutes of triple jumping and 20 minutes of pole vaulting and 20 minutes of throwing the discus and 20 minutes of throwing the hammer and, an entire weekend of that stuff. And a lot of endurance coaches really don't care about the pole vault or the triple jump and don't care to spend the money and time to go through a process that they regard as superfluous to what they're trying to do. Level two, thank God, level two probably the first time I took it probably almost cost me my job and my marriage. but it was 10 days long in the bad old days. You went to a college campus and disappeared from the world for 10 days.
Wow. Okay.
And 5 days were sports science, and then you received a test at the end of every day. You got an 80 on the test, you got to advance to the next one. And then 5 days of sports specific stuff. Because I took it in the dark ages, I have been told that all of the science based program is now done online.
I see.
But the 5 day programming design section is done in person.
I see.
Science stuff is, by the way, um, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. It's physics. It relates to form. It's exercise physiology. It's a deeper dive than you would get from the RRCA because, again, they've got they've essentially crammed 5 days worth of material into an online, I guess, a series of online sections. But the level two itself is 5 days of program discussion, design. You actually do small group work where much like the RRCA does, do small group work across a series of scenarios. The U.S. Track and Cross Country Coaches Association um, is it's an association of largely college and performance based coaches. So that program is not a great fit for what the RRCA is doing either, because how many of you are going to coach a college level
Yep.
runner? The answer is probably not many, maybe a couple. But that also consists of 5 days of put your backside in a seat. That's a little less interactive. It tends to be more lecture based. But again, it's go to a college campus and park for 5 days. They do not require a level one, but they do require some sort of base experience in coaching, organizational coaching. But that said, again, I was just looking for as broad an education as I could get across the track and field spectrum. Probably most of your people, you know, maybe if they were going to coach at the high school level and wanted some more background, that would make sense. But that said, the endurance programs of both USATF and US Track and Field and Cross Country Coaches Association are excellent.
Got it.
Well designed. They're taught by high level coaches. They're the real thing.
Got it. Interesting. And then, of course, RRCA, we'll discuss it shortly. Man, that was a great section. Brent as a coach section. Few points that I wanted to just bring it out, as I always do after every section, is one, coach the person and not the program. I think that was a very good sort of insight to your journey. Secondly, respect and creating awesome human beings is something that we always try to do in our organization as well. So it was a very enlightening story about that lady that you talked about. And I think I just wanted to share that with everyone here as well, which is, a true long distance running brings out a strength of character in people. And it's like mountaineering, something that's hard to do over an extended period of time requires a certain level of pedigree when it comes to a strong character. And when you aspire to be in that pedigree, you also, the fundamental sort of sauce in which you can create that pedigree is respect. Respect for yourself, respect for the sport, respect for other people's time, respect for your coach, respect for your family supporting you to do the training. There's a lot of things that needs to be in place for you to maybe get to the start line of a full marathon, let alone the finish line. Forget about the finish line. Getting to the start line well trained with full confidence requires a lot of things to be in place. And you need to have that respect of all of those things, to be thankful, so that all of those things remain in place for you to get to the start.
Bala, your last point is a very important one. I've noticed when runners fail at a race, they have a tendency to look to oh, this one single thing went wrong. No, when you succeed, you probably did 15 things right. When you fail, you're probably not going to be able to find a single identifiable feature on why did this happen to me. What probably needs to happen is you need to look at the whole system.
Exactly.
Bala's point towards that is there are a lot of factors in play, and certainly the support that you get from your family and your teammates and your coach are really an important part of that formula.
Absolutely. So I think it's a great way you brought that up. And then finally, confidence. It is easy to put all of you through the ringer and get you through the distances and all that. But the true job of a coach is to show you what you right now think you are not capable of. And the key ingredient for that is to build that confidence. So why am that struck a chord with me, Brent? Especially is because my runners here in this group are all first time out of the couch runners who have never, or maybe they've done something in their college time, school time, and now 15, 20 years of life has passed by them. And suddenly they find themselves as a mom or a dad sitting in a couch looking at TV and suddenly thinking, yeah, maybe I'll join Bala's program and do something. And I wanted to install in them that, yes, you can. You can actually do these things. It is just that you got to build your confidence on this one. And that's my primary role. And I've seen that for folks that I've built them the confidence, they quickly move from 5K to full marathon in 2, 3 years. And all of us have gone through that. And I think that's one beautiful story you brought up. And those of you who are listening, have that confidence that if 500 of us could do this from couch to full marathon, you 250 folks who just joined right now, have that confidence that you also can do it if you follow the basics of the program and just respect the program, respect the sport, respect all the things that we talked about. You will get there too. I think that's the message that I gleaned from Brent's thought process here. Thank you, Brent. That was just phenomenal for me personally as well. So let's go to the last section, which is you as a running executive. Maybe let's start a little bit. Just tell to the audience, what is RRCA? And as an ex-president of RRCA, what was your role? And then we can talk a little bit about the courses that you used to lead and,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Roadrunners Club of America is an interesting creation. Note the emphasis on singular. Roadrunners Club of America. It is, in fact, an association of 1,400 running clubs across the country, and then another about 1,000 independent races that we provide insurance for. They're also granted membership. And there are some pretty big races like the Lilac Blooms Day run in Spokane, Washington, the Cherry Blossom 10 miler in Washington, D.C. Some pretty standout established races like that are also members. The executive director cringes when I say this, but I describe the RRCA as a trade association for running clubs. And so we got our start in late 1950s when the then governing body of all things running was the Amateur Athletic Union. And the AAU had kind of an iron grip on a very small universe. The universe of road racing was tiny. Keep in mind, this is also pre-Title IX, so it was overwhelmingly male, it was overwhelmingly tiny. And so, for example, my first road race, which I showed up for as a senior in college, 5 mile road race, had 20 people in it. Now, I will say this, almost all of them were sharks. It was a small, speed-based, fast community. I once was sent results from a 10 miler in my hometown just after I graduated, and they had 15, 20 people finish a 10 miler, and every single one of them broke an hour. I mean, these guys were cooking. But what the AAU decided was that you could not put on a road race unless they sanctioned it and you paid them a sanctioning fee. But there was an exception, and the exception was, and this is where the singularness of the Roadrunners Club of America comes in. You could, unless you produced an intramural race. So a bunch of guys got together and they created the Roadrunners Club of America, and they started holding races all over the places without AAU sanction. And the AAU came to them and said, "You can't put these races on." They said, "No, no, we can, because these are all of our subchapters that are putting on intramural races." So, Roadrunners Club of America, Washington, D.C. branch, the Roadrunners Club of America, Boston, Massachusetts branch, Roadrunners Club was all a subterfuge, just designed to undercut the AAU's iron grip on the sport. And thereupon the fight started. Oh, my goodness. And over time, the AAU was disbanded as being they did nothing to promote women's running. They did nothing to promote, you know, engagement with the minority community. They did nothing. They just didn't. And they regarded their job as to grow themselves and collect fees as opposed to serving the community. So that's kind of, as a consequence, the RRCA has some characteristics that are born out of that experience. So, for example, we will almost never tell you the RRCA way of doing anything. We will make a suggestion. We will say that we think this is in your best interest, but we will never tell you to directly do X, Y, or Z. That's a direct result of our having been born from an organization that told you you had to do this uncategorically. And the other thing is, we tend to be more community based. It's very easy to create an RRCA club. You just need 10 like minded souls and a constitution, and our national office will supply the constitution if you need it, if you want it. But then you get a lot of cool things. You get access to coaching, you get your events insured, your officers and directors are provided with liability insurance. And all of that comes on a per member annual dues. Oh, it's per family annual dues. So if you have a family of 6, they pay the same as a family of 1. I originally got involved with one of the directors of the Cherry Blossom 10 miler in DC, called on my congressional office for help in getting a permit from the National Park Service, and he ended up with me. So thereupon ensued probably hour and a half conversation about running. And we were successful. My boss at that time, the Congresswoman, served on the Interior Committee, which oversaw the National Park Service. And we were successful in getting them the permit. We stayed in touch over time. And then they had an opening on the board for treasurer. And Jeff Darman, the individual in question, asked me to consider running. I was like, how am I going to get elected? These people don't know me. Yeah. He said, don't worry about that. I'll take care of that part. So I originally went on the board as treasurer, and then came off the board, and there was a tremendous split in the RRCA. It almost fell apart. And in Jeff, my mentor, was one of the people tasked with getting the two organizations back together again. And they created a task force of 5 members of the Runaway organization and 5 members of the RRC organization. And Jeff asked me to go on the RRCA board so I could be part of that reconciliation process. And the board opening was at Eastern Region Director. And I told Jeff, I said, I'll work hard to put the organization back together again, but I have very little interest in serving as Eastern Region Director and doing the sort of grassroots stuff that you needed to do. So over the course of putting the organization back together, I guess I created enough goodwill that they actually bypassed the vice president of the organization, which was the usual stepping stone, and elected me president. So
amazing. That just shows
how that happened. But it was really, again, just a matter of, someone gave me a sign one time that said, luck is where preparation meets opportunity. And certainly I've been given all kinds of opportunity.
It's amazing. How many years you served, Brent, as president of RRCA?
Two-year terms.
Okay, 4 years basically.
Yeah.
And then you also did coaching for level 1 and level 2 coaches.
Yeah, what we did during my last year as coach, we reworked the curriculum of the coaching certification program and hired Randy Aceta to essentially write it. He's the current coaching director. So the irony is, I then left the organization, and they went on their merry way. And about a year later, I got a call. Hey, do you want to teach? And so that created the unique situation where I had hired Randy, but now I worked for Randy.
And, yeah. But we
so
are all the
so
more.
that's been interesting. And I did that more or less consistently for about 10 years. Um, in the middle of this year, I stepped away. In all honesty, Bala, I love the in-person classes. And I guess it reflects the way I like to coach, right? There were 35 people in a room interacting, and that was the kind of coaching I enjoyed. Um, 18 hours locked in my study for a Zoom session over an entire weekend, not so much.
I know that takes a toll, but
But Bobby and I traveled. We tried out new restaurants in different parts of the country. We met new people face to face, socialized with them. That was pretty cool.
absolutely. I mean, I'm honored, Brent, that I was under you as one of your students for level 1. And I think if my memory serves me right, we were your last class for level 2
Yeah,
certification in Orlando when we were together. I think after that, did you do any training after that, or that was? I thought you told me
yeah.
that was the last.
I did a couple of Zoom classes, and then the last time Bobby and I taught in person was in Maryland, probably uh, 6 months ago.
Got it.
It's interesting, Bala. Um, that class was not full. After years and years and years of all of our in-person classes selling out and having waiting lists,
Yep.
um, as much as I preferred the in-person classes, the Zoom classes, the customers are voting with their feet, and they like them because there are no travel expenses involved. No,
Yep.
you don't. They don't lose travel and family time going to them. They're just their convenience factor is clearly what's driving the market. So
That's right.
I don't necessarily like that, but it doesn't matter.
Oh, that's the nature of the game right now. Working from home,
Yeah, absolutely.
training from home. I mean, especially after COVID, that has taken its own life form. Hey, Brent, I just want to say on behalf of millions of runners that has spawned from the hundreds of coaches you have trained over the years. Just wanted to say thank you on behalf of all of them. I know I'm sure you.
I
Thank you
I
for.
estimate I did count those, Bala. There have been over 5,000 coaches trained in the classes that I've taught.
Oh my goodness. Guys, that's what driving impact looks like. Coach train the trainers and the trainers with a certain culture, and the
Yeah.
trainers will take care of training the runners, and that's how impact spreads. Brent, seriously, 5,000 coaches on behalf of all the 5,000 coaches, and let's say each of them on an average just coached 10 runners, you're talking of 50,000 runners. And I'm sure the number is much more than that. I just want to say thank you for that. It changed my life. I drive happiness by driving impact on other people's lives. And I would say thank you for introducing me in the right way in the face-to-face level 1 class many 4 or 5 years ago. Let's get to the business end of this call. I know I've already taken more time than what I originally thought I would take with you. Sorry for that. But my last question to you is, as I said, we have 250 amateur first-time runners. Specifically for them, what would you give few words of wisdom to them as they begin their journey of running in their life?
I Bobby, Dr. Gessler, Bobby And I taught a class in Philadelphia that consisted of almost entirely, like 30 to 35 people were working with first time runners. And we asked them, what is the single most critical period of time? And almost to a person, they said, if we can get them through the first 3 to 4 weeks, they generally will stick with the program.
Interesting.
So being encouraging of them and allaying their fears and teaching them something about footwear, nutrition, form, whatever, is without them freaking out, because for many of them, it's an entirely new undertaking. So I would tell you, just be patient.
Yeah.
The good news is, and it is going to be a little uncomfortable at first. Good news is, when you get down the road several weeks, you'll begin to see big leaps of improvement. But you just got to put up with the first month or two where it may be a little rough and rocky and you don't understand what's going on. But as a general rule of thumb, the body addresses to a specific stress generally in a 3 to 6 week time. And the other thing I would tell you is the rest and the recovery is as important as the work.
Yes.
A lot of times, especially young kids, believe it's just hard work that's going to get me where I'm going. And they drive themselves into the dirt. And I repeatedly tell them, you do a little bit of work, you recover from it. You do a little bit of work, you recover from it. Just be patient and bear with it, because you've got excellent qualified people helping.
Absolutely. Wow. Wow. Beautiful words. The the magic of habit takes, there is this thing, 21 days to form a habit. I think Brent is touching on that. First 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Like anything new you start, it's going to be rocky, it's going to be difficult. But that's not the representation of the journey that you're going to take over a long, hopefully extended months and years, like what we all have been doing. So all of us have started like that, guys. So if there is one thing you can take away from this, is all of us, including Brent, had the same first 3, 4, 5 weeks of struggle. So if you're struggling, then there is every possibility you might be the next Brent. Think like that. Have the confidence. And Brent, boy, this last whatever 1 hour or so went by so quickly. I can continue. As I said, you are a well encyclopedia of experience and knowledge that I can keep asking, and I had to literally restrict myself from asking more questions. But thank you for your time, Brent. This is I know you are coaching. You're having your own holiday timings and holiday things you are doing. But I just wrote to you once, and immediately you accepted. That just shows how much of a giver you are. So thank you for that. Thank you for inspiring a lot of people. Thank you for inspiring me to be what I'm doing right now. And 5,000 coaches, 50,000 minimum runners. Maybe it's in my opinion, it'll be 200,000 runners that you have impacted over your career as an RRCA executive and coach, training coach. More than 1,000 runners who have actually trained through you. Man, your resume runs broad and deep, and for a long period of time on running. Thank you, Brent. I'm going to also share your glossary of books and interesting things that you had painstakingly put forth, I think, over a period of your life, I guess. Various interesting things. I have it still with me. It's in my desktop always. I will share it to my fellow runners. And thank you, Brent, for your time.
Well, thank you, Bala. Keep doing great things.
Thanks a lot, Brent.